everybody. I think we should get started. Okay, so thank you and welcome to the Sensi Lab live stream version of our forum. I would like to thank Isabel Knowles and Van Sauerwein for joining us today to talk about their work. Van and Isabel are artists who work with stop motion animation, immersive installation in VR to create digital and physical experiences. And in this forum, they're going to talk a little bit about their technical and creative work in installation and film. They investigate narratives of belonging and metamorphosis, and they have engaged audiences both physically and emotionally around the world in venues like Ars Electronica, Seoul New Media Biennial, and various art galleries, including Mona, and in competition at film festivals like Venice, Cannes, and Sundance. Thank you so much for joining us, Isabel and Van, and I'm going to hand over to you guys to talk more about your process and give us a little insight into your work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thank you everybody for being present in these very strange, these times that we find ourselves in. So it's really wonderful that you're able to join us for this live webinar, which we're both doing from our own homes at the moment. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, upon whose land we are meeting right now and that we work on. So I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to thank Sensi Lab for having us. It's really wonderful to be here. So thanks to Katie and everyone at Sensi Lab for hosting this forum. So this forum came about because Isabel and I have, we opened on the 13th of February a new show at Art Space at Realm in Ringwood, which is called Take Me With You. And this is a survey show of a lot of our major works beginning in 2004 and right up till 2019. So this exhibition, which was scheduled to run until the end of April, but is currently closed, it really gave us an opportunity to sort of get a sense, an overview of our practice and to sort of think about, what is important to us, what work do we make and why do we make it? And so, what we're going to do today is sort of think about the common threads that tie our practice together.
We're going to start by, over the talk, we're going to try and answer this question. How can we create deep emotional connections through immersive technologies? Just to start with, by immersive technologies, we mean exhibitions or kind of art experiences that are usually screen or projected artworks that surround the audience or directly engage and involve the audience actively in some way. There's a lot of incredible artists and technologists and scientists all creating very interesting work in this field, in immersive technology. But we have a particular aim, which is to create really strong emotional connections through immersive technologies. So we're kind of going to talk about how we first came to this type of artwork. So we both started off with a love of animation and were drawn to this and studied at RMIT together.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is a still from really our first collaboration, which was called Jillian, which was my honours film, which we made in 2001 when we were both studying at RMIT. So we both came to RMIT because we both were really interested in animation. And for me personally, it's hard for me to think about what initially drew me to animation, but one of the things that I did an arts degree and a science degree before I went to RMIT to study media arts. And I got really obsessed during this period with collecting old dolls that I found in op shops. So I would find dolls and make up stories for them. And I guess that kind of morphed into wanting to create animations with these dolls, animations with these kind of puppet people that I'd found.
And I started animating back in high school. I just was really excited about the medium, about making, other kinds of art forms, putting them into motion, working with music, combining all these different. I felt like animation was a way to combine a whole lot of different things that I was really interested in. But also, what I really loved about animation was being able to create a kind of an environment and a mood that was, dreamlike or surreal, or existed in some other kind of realm that wasn't in the real world. So our collaboration began back then at RMIT, where we were both really interested in making traditional animated films, but also that the course we were studying opened our eyes to interactive artwork and new technologies. It was the late 90s, so it was kind of the birth of that sort of interactive work, or kind of like internet art and CD-ROMs, and a bunch of that kind of early technology stuff was around. And as well as creating our traditional films, we were also starting to work in interactive animations and creating narratives that had interactive elements to them. We started off with kind of more defined roles of director and animator and cinematographer and that kind of thing, but over time our collaboration changed into being more organic, and we've been collaborating now for about 20 years, and it's it's been a really long time, and it's become a really strong way of creating work for us. From the very beginning of each project, we're constantly in discussions about concepts and approaches and challenging each other's ideas and perspectives, making sure that we're creating something really strong and kind of hole-proof in a way.
So I'm just going to give a quick overview of our work here, but we will be discussing various works in a bit more detail throughout this presentation. But we began, as Isabel said, doing more film-based work. So the earliest still, when we looked quite young, was from shooting Clara in 2004. So we began with sort of some more film-based works, but we really quickly moved into more interactive and installation-based work, which was really, I think for both of us, a product of going to RMIT and studying media arts, because we were initially interested in animation, but then we really branched out into other forms of, of artistic expression, I suppose. So in this slide here, you can see a range of works dating from 2003, which was an early interactive work. You can see there's a little girl who's squeezing a teddy bear to interact with the character on screen, through to a couple of 10-year-old or so interactive works which use webcams. You're in My Dream and Is a Jungle in Here, both of which you put your head into a hole in a sculpture and it takes a live feed of your face. Then Out in the Open was a linear film, but it was installed at the Queen Vic Market, and it really was very much an immersive experience for audiences. And our most recent work was Passenger, which we showed as part of Take Me With You, our survey show, and that was a VR stop motion animated work. So in terms of, I guess, what our work has in common, or what is coherent about it, we always use stop motion animation, and we do have very much an aesthetic coherence throughout our work. We are very hands-on, but we can't do this alone. So what you see here is the product of a collaboration with a number of incredible people that we've met along the way. So we've been really fortunate to be able to work with an incredible team, in particular some amazing programmers that we've worked with, incredible sound designers, producers, model and props makers. So everything that we do is a collaborative effort, and we definitely want to acknowledge all the incredible people that we work with. As a little aside as well, before we go any further, it's a bit tricky for us sometimes to know what to call the person who is experiencing our work, because we do work across, film, interactive technologies and immersive experiences. We could possibly use the word immersant, but that doesn't always work. That's great for VR, but we don't just do VR. So we've chosen to use the word viewer, which we'll use throughout this presentation. Now, of course, viewer implies vision only, and sound is incredibly important to us as well. So yes, I hope that you will forgive us for using that term, but it's sort of the easiest one we've been able to use. User feels a bit too technical, so we're going to talk about the viewer throughout this presentation, while acknowledging that there are other terms we could also use.
So we've broken down the threads in our work to 4 main areas, and the first one of these is characters. All of our works use characters, character-based narratives to tell a story. Here are some of our characters lounging around, closer than 1.5 meters. Characters are an age-old device for connecting to people emotionally through literature and theatre and all art forms. Characters are really significant in telling stories. They're a really great way of drawing viewers in and creating a connection by having viewers identify with characters and personalities on screen. They're always kind of a starting point for us when making work. Once we've kind of fleshed out an idea, we begin thinking about who are the characters in our film and what are their function and how are they going to deliver this story or this, this information or communication that we want to do. So yes, they're a really central part of our work. We use them in lots of different ways, and they often have all different functions. So the characters in some of our early works, Expecting and Play With Me, would stare directly at you and make eye contact, maintaining eye contact through most of the film and kind of imploring you to interact with them and to engage with them directly. And in our latest film, Passenger, we have a taxi driver that talks directly to you in kind of a one-sided dialogue that's, not unusual in a taxi anyway, but this really tells you what the story's about through this dialogue and this taxi driver interacting directly with you. I'll just show a clip of Passenger.
Very heavy suitcases you've got there. So, where are we going? Okay, 185. Okay, good.
Just getting back to the slides. We have another way of using characters, which is in It's a Jungle in Here and You're in My Dream. As a viewer, your face is live streamed onto the characters in real time, so that you can become part of the animation and that your face is the face of the characters in that film. And in Passenger, again, the other character in Passenger is you as the passenger sitting in the back seat, and you can see in the still there that we put the camera inside a body and gave the character a body. In particular, in It's a Jungle in Here, we really wanted to create a tension between the characters on screen that would also impact on the two people who were off screen playing. So in that story, there's a whole lot of different scenarios which create tension between two people, and we were really interested in the way that connected, that people would connect to that both on screen and off screen. I'll just take a clip of that one too.
So in terms of our characters, something else that we do a lot is we work with both human and animal characters. So yeah, earlier works probably were really mainly human characters, but in our works over the last the last 10 years or so, we've been working more and more with a blend of both human and animal characters. So part of this is an influence from fables and fairy tales, where I guess in those cases animals represent different human traits and allow for symbolism and metaphor. And what using animal characters does for us is it really opens up our storytelling abilities and kind of creates more open and more symbolic narratives sometimes that I guess allow the viewer to be more immersed in certain ways, or perhaps to connect more in other ways. So that's part of the reason we use animals sometimes. It's also a way for us, I suppose, to create characters that are less, specific in terms of, say, age, sex, racial characteristics, and again, can make characters that are perhaps more open-ended and more able to be more able to be related to by a range of different people. So that has really kind of, I guess, opened up our practice in certain ways to be able to work with animals, which, yeah, we've been pretty much doing off and on for quite some time now. We also sometimes use animals to, I guess, push back against ideas of human dominance over animal species. So in You're in My Dream from 2010, where you, again, it's a live feed of your face and you are a human character, but you actually throughout the work become transformed into different types of animals. So traditionally in animation, animals are anthropomorphized. So animals take on human characteristics like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, to use some famous examples. Whereas in You're in My Dream, we kind of went the other way and actually transformed you from a human to an animal character. Sort of, I guess, yeah, perhaps re-looking at, balancing that power dynamic, or that the general kind of setup, I suppose, of the human-animal relationship. So yeah, You're in My Dream was very much about reworking those relationships, whereas It's a Jungle in Here, which was a bit darker on the right here, was kind of positing a world where you can shapeshift, but it's much darker, because here in this case the animals represent the negative qualities of humans, I guess a bit more like fables and fairy tales sometimes. So the sleazy man here becomes a snake or a serpent as he kind of attacks the unfortunate woman next to him on the train. We kind of use animals for a number of reasons, including a way to depict kind of darker area of our psyches without being too dark and intense. Because It's a Jungle in Here is a much darker work, and often at the end you do end up being kind of attacked by the animals or brought in by the animals. But again, I guess thinking about the experience for the viewer of the work and, feeling that empathy and connection, we'd really drawn people in, and when you draw people into an immersive experience that's quite intense, you also have a responsibility not to go too far and make it too intense. And using animals, having the people transform into animals, was a way to kind of, explore difficult themes without being too intense and really kind of, frightening people too much, I guess. When thinking about a lot of our works where you have humans transforming into animals, or in Passenger from 2019, you have transformations happening in that work as well that aren't quite the same, but there is sort of shape-shifting occurring. We got to thinking about metamorphosis, and Paul Wells, in his text, Understanding Animation, he talks about the 7 fundamentals of animation, or I guess the language of animation, the things that animation do well. And this spoke to us because he says, in enabling the collapse of the illusion of physical space, metamorphosis destabilizes the image, conflating horror and humor, dream and reality, certainty and speculation. And this really feels like something we do try and do in our work a lot. So not just through Metamorphosis, but also through the spaces we create and the installations we create. We are looking at, I guess, destabilizing standard image making practices, and I guess we kind of walk a bit of a fine line between, making something that is perhaps a little bit horrible, but we use humor as well to kind of counteract that. We have works that are a little bit dreamlike, but then feel very real as well. So we are constantly kind of pushing and pulling between, I guess, opposites to create a really kind of intense and present, but enjoyable, but also difficult experience for our viewers.
Another of the devices that we use in pretty much every work is narrative. So hand in hand with character, we use narrative with sounds and music and all the things that go along with making a cinematic narrative. But the stories that we work with are often very open-ended, and we're trying to disrupt traditional storytelling styles, I guess. So even with traditional film-based works like Clara, we're kind of not really telling the whole story. We're sort of giving a moment in time almost, and through the use of kind of, we're using a lot of body language, and there's not any dialogue in Clara, but we're kind of inviting you to be a fly on the wall in that film, or almost as if you are actually there. We're inviting you into the story by kind of involving you in some way. And in the other more traditional film that we've made out in the open, it's certainly like that as well, where we've got this narrative that's it's kind of very still and very contemplative, and was designed to sit at the market and be part of the landscape of the market. And this story, it really invites you to be kind of there with it and be part of the story, even though it's not an active part that you take in that film. Let's play you a clip of Out in the Open. Through this use of this kind of, or by avoiding like narration or dialogue and that kind of more direct engagement of the viewer, and allowing the viewer space to bring their own emotional layer to the film, we're kind of engaging with more of an empathetic way of telling a story, or way of understanding a story, rather than a more direct narrative form. Sorry, I'm trying to find where my slides are up to.
So yeah, I guess Isabel just talked about the sort of open-ended storytelling that we use to create emotional connections with audiences. And another big part of the way we create emotional connections is through our aesthetic, which is quite a particular aesthetic and carries across to, I guess, all of our works and productions. We're going to, in terms of thinking about our aesthetic, we were trying to break it down. And so one of the really critical aspects of it is that it is handmade. So we really make everything ourselves that's in our films, and it's really important, or films and artworks, I should say. And it's really important to us that it's kind of looks handcrafted as well. So these are stills from Take Me With You, where we displayed sets from Passenger, which was our VR stop motion 360 film that we made last year. And in this film, we really had a big dilemma about what techniques to use and whether we should go with 3D or other options. And in the end, it was pretty hard to do, but we did manage to actually make a whole kind of miniature world out of cardboard. And that's actually, I think, what's been one of the most successful aspects of the film, because the handmade really kind of gives the viewer a sense that objects are real and that they were touched by real people, and it feels like you have a more personal connection with them. I mean, this isn't to say that you can't have that with other aesthetics or other methods, but yeah, for us that's really important, the handmade. Handmade objects also kind of create a really strong connection with the audience. We just use this image here to show Isabel filming out in the open to kind of get a sense of the fact that these are, you know, real objects that exist in real space, you know, that you can actually view, you know, in certain situations, as well as watching them in the film. I'll just show a couple of clips of, I guess, our handmade aesthetics. So I'm just going to switch across to the video here. So this shows you how we animate kind of frame by frame. So you can see Isabel's kind of moving the bits of fabric around while our character appears to be, moving them around. And it gives you a sense of, you know, what our stop motion process looks like. So our animation, you literally move the puppets one frame, take a photo, and then move them one more frame. So it's quite a time-consuming process. So not only are our sets handmade, but the motion we craft is handmade. So it doesn't have that sort of smooth edge. It does look a little bit kind of, you know, hand done, and has a slight roughness to it that gives it a lot of charm. I'll also show a clip where we were filming Passenger, which was the VR stop motion film, which will also give you a sense of, it's quite different, but there's that same handmade aesthetic and production technique here. So with this setup, we had to kind of set up all these, houses, these suburban houses, and what you can see us doing here, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually a camera behind the light in the middle here, and we're actually animating frame by frame the houses transforming from a single-story suburban house into a two-story kind of much more elaborate suburban house. So yeah, you can see this is sort of just showing that our practice, I guess, is extremely hands-on, which, you know, to kind of adds to that emotional connection. In thinking about, I guess, stop motion animation and handmade objects and working with them, it's interesting to kind of reflect on what that means. And there's an academic, Suzanne Buchan, who's written extensively about stop motion animation in particular. And she talks about how what's interesting about stop motion and working with objects is that it exists both as a physical experience in the real world. So here you can see a still from Take Me With You, where we actually exhibited sets from Passenger. So all those cardboard objects exist, you know, as sets in the real world. But they also exist as an object experienced haptically through the animation of them. So in the film world of Passenger, or the VR world of Passenger. So there's a sort of a weird dual existence of these objects, which kind of makes them a bit uncanny in certain ways, but also opens up new ways for us to connect with viewers. And following on from that, just in terms of our production process, here are some assortment of slides from various productions, kind of showing that we're, you know, constantly working with real materials and objects. That's I think that's a heat gun, actually, drying George, our character, in the middle there, and we're building sets in some of the other images. And here are more images, sort of showing that we work with a lot of these kind of, I guess, more traditional, craft and art techniques.
The materiality of our aesthetic is really important to us. So you can see in that series of stills there that we're using a lot of very simple materials, bits of real trees and things up in the You're in My Dream set. We used a bit of modelling clay and stuff to make fruit out in the open, and then cardboard as in passenger and out in the open is very predominant texture. And using these familiar materials, it really helps you connect texturally to the work, so that when you're watching it, you understand what everything's made of, and it sort of in a way makes it even more strange that those things are moving around, rather than, say, in a drawn cartoon, the whole world is abstract anyway. So the fact that it's moving around on screen it fits into that world. But with these physical objects, there's something very strange about them moving around. It's something that we're very attracted to, and hope that it works for the audience, for the viewers to connect with the work as well. Another critical aspect of our aesthetic is these very appealing looking characters and sets, which you could call cute or childlike. And this is, very common to animation to have these, cute imagery. With our work, we really try and sit that, charming, appealing characters into worlds that also feel fairly contemporary, and we do a lot of, make a lot of decisions about making sure our sets and everything feel like worlds that we live in and that are familiar to us, even though they're made out of different types of materials that might make them feel a little bit more cute or childlike. And it's kind of makes you feel this sense of nurture, or this wanting to take care of the world that you're watching. Making the characters look this way and be sort of charming also is softening the blow of some of the more dark concepts or more dark actions that we're portraying on screen. So if we were to look at this slide and think about it being a real bear and a real person, that would be quite terrifying. But when it's an animated, drawn bear, it's obviously the idea is still present, and hopefully the part of that emotional engagement you get with that part of the narrative is there, but without the sheer terror that might come from it being real.
Finally, in terms of our aesthetic, we obviously work a lot with the miniature, which is very connected to the handmade, but we are also making miniature versions of real objects. So here are some sets from out in the open where we actually remade fruit boxes. So if those fruit boxes look familiar to you, that's because these are actually real fruit and vegetable boxes we found at the Queen Vic Market, and we painstakingly photographed them and recreated them and their assorted fruit to recreate the market. And it is sort of interesting to think about what using miniatures does and is. And I guess the most famous theorist on miniatures is Susan Stewart, who wrote a book in 1984 on longing, where she looked at the miniature, the gigantic, the souvenir, and the collection. It's interesting, though, because she talks a lot about the miniature as a site for control and delineation. So by making miniature objects, it's a way of kind of controlling the world and, sort of putting things in and out of the world. And that kind of take on the miniature, which is really common, I feel, is kind of very, very much posited on the miniature as an object that you stand outside of. Whereas I guess what we do with miniatures is we place you inside of them. We actually kind of shrink you down to place you at the same height so that this kind of looks real or looks the right size when you're viewing or immersed in our work. But I guess for us, what it does with miniatures is that they add to a sense of uncanniness, because you're in these worlds where everything looks very familiar and recognizable, but something about the scale is just a little bit off and a little bit strange. So that again creates a sort of a slightly unsettled feeling, which disrupts traditional forms of viewing and hopefully actually allows you to kind of push past standard ways you might interact with various media and go a little bit deeper to have a slightly different experience. In Take Me With You, which is the survey show in Ringwood, here's a still of Clara, which is actually a 2004 film that we've shown you stills of already. But what we did here is we actually took, the house here is probably about 1.5 meters tall, so it's not technically a miniature in some ways, but it is a much, it's a scaled down version of a real house. And we were really interested in this exhibition in, I guess, not just presenting standalone films, but creating immersive experiences from a number of different levels. So here we use the miniature as a device for placing the film inside of it, which really kind of plays with scale, and I think drew people in even more, because I was to be honest, I was surprised that a lot of people commented on watching this film, which, you can see online in a lot of different forms, but placing it in that installation context within the miniature house, definitely added a lot of interest. So moving on from our aesthetic considerations, we want to conclude by talking about technology, because this is obviously a major part of our work, and we use a lot of different technologies alongside all our kind of older, more traditional, craft and art-based materials and aesthetic. So we sort of keep asking ourselves, why do we do this? Like, why do we use technology? Why do we make complex, VR or 360 films or complex interactives that are really quite difficult to make, take a lot of time, and, can be really frustrating sometimes when things don't work and have to be tested a huge amount? I guess to answer that question, it's in part due to the era that we started to make artwork in. So when we started to make art and films more professionally, it was the early 2000s, and media art was really coming to the fore. There was a huge rise in interest in different art forms, and I guess in different technologies, as we moved into more powerful desktop computers and were able to do things like, edit video at home, that kind of thing. So yeah, we both, I guess, were attracted to technology and found it really interesting. But I guess it's really because it does really allow us to create deeper connections with and immersion for our viewers. Technology is what really kind of allows us to create, experiences that are perhaps new and different in certain ways, and really allow us to engage with our viewers, our immersants, as much as we can.
In a lot of our works, technology means that the viewer has agency, and we give the viewer choices to make or actions to perform as part of the narrative. So here in these slides, we've got It's a Jungle in Here, that's what it's called. And as we've talked about in that one, the story is between the two people on screen that are also the two people sitting side by side. The one on the right has a button with which to attack, and the person on the left has a microphone with which to protest. And so this, the technology gives us a really great way of interacting with the film and giving the viewer kind of the ability to change what's happening on screen. Although it might seem like you have this agency, but of course we've pre-programmed all of the outcomes, and we essentially have control, and your only control is to either play or not play in most cases. But giving the the viewer an agency in this way also gives them a responsibility in the film. So when you're watching that one, you see yourself doing these things, and your connection to it is both as a passive viewer of what's happening, but also because your face is on it, you have the responsibility for your actions in some kind of way too. So you're forced to think about what that means in the hypothetical situation there. And in expecting the slide on the right, you have the agency with this, being given the agency through clicking on, squeezing this teddy bear that is connected through the screen to the girl who's on screen there via an umbilical cord, which we filmed in the animation and then had protruding from the screen into the real world. So we had this kind of physical connection with the character on screen, and the teddy bear would, as we squeezed it, would pump up her stomach, and then she gave birth to a little friend and played tea parties. And the other way that technology is really great is with the ability to immerse the audience in the experience. So for us, these ones that we did recently with a bit further ago, with the face being transported onto the animation, bringing your face into the animation, with Passenger, the virtual reality piece, being able to put your whole body or your whole, all of your senses into the animation was a really exciting way of engaging with viewers for us. So I'm just trying to find the next slide.
I'll just talk in a sec about empathy maps and designing experiences, but I just want to quickly acknowledge we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much, and please keep asking questions. We'll just finish the presentation and take some questions in a couple of minutes. So yeah, please, if you want to ask questions by chat in the Q&A section on your screen, please do that and we'll totally get back to those. But just to come back to designing experiences, one of the things we really kind of have at the foreground whenever we think about interactive works is, I guess, empathy and what the viewer is experiencing. So in a traditional empathy map, on the left here, you've got a user and you use this for research and you listen to what the user says, but also work out what the user's thinking, doing and feeling in terms of particular decision making around, whatever you might be researching. And I guess for us, we've kind of replaced listening to what people say with our experience. So thinking about creating a multisensory experience that involves, an installation and vision and sound and perhaps touch as well. And the viewer's at the forefront of our thinking at all times. So we're always thinking about what the viewer's going to be doing, what are they going to be clicking or touching, or where are they going to be looking? What are they going to be thinking, and what is the viewer going to be feeling? And I think because we're two of us, it makes it a bit easier to kind of think more empathetically and constantly bounce ideas off each other and challenge each other about what the viewer may or may not be doing or thinking. And we do a lot of user testing, or as much as we can, with interactive artworks, where we're really kind of keeping that viewer at the centre of our experience. A big part of our experiences are also the installation or the setup of them. So as well as the kind of technological experience, there's also the physical experience. And we found that, not always, but particularly VR is an interesting one that seems to work well in an installation context, because not only is the tech already there, but you've got invigilators that can actually set people up and help them with the technology. Obviously there's a different audience, which will be, people who've got their own VR headsets at home who know how to work it. And, that is a potential audience too for us. But there is something lovely about creating a space and creating a full immersive experience where you can, really kind of curate, what it feels like, what it looks like, and how you're interacted with as well. We also find that installation really helps in terms of getting people to commit to see artworks, particularly because a lot of our work isn't, doesn't have a lot of dialogue, or I don't know if you'd say it has a slower pace, but definitely has a sort of a different pace and does ask actually a lot more emotional engagement. So we find that actually setting up an installation really helps with this. I'll show a clip of out in the open where, actually, no, maybe I won't. I don't know where that's gone, sorry. Of the installation, where is that? Maybe it's not here, sorry, everybody. But yeah, I was going to show a clip of out in the open as an installation where we actually ask people to come and sit down, which really kind of helps. And here you can see our recent installation at Ringwood where, because the set was there, it really encouraged people to come and sit down and watch the work and engage with it a lot more.
There's a still of it. We can see the still of it there in the big market.
Yeah.
So talking about the combination now of stop motion with the technology, because there's a lot of technological stuff that uses animation, but it might be more computer generated. We really like this combination of animation techniques, which might be very, very old. The first stop motion film was at the very end of the 19th century, and using those techniques with the latest and greatest of technological animation. The depiction of motion goes back even far, far longer than the end of the 19th century. This is a picture from the Werner Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams, which was a film about some caves that were discovered in France, and these drawings date back to 35,000 years ago, where you can see that the artist has tried to depict all the different motions and movements of different animals on the walls of the cave. And I'm just going to play a video of combining, I think I've got it here, yes, our, this stop motion technique, which is very basic, just moving something frame by frame and filming it with the camera. But now we're using this camera that's got two lenses and blends the picture together to make a surround video only viewable through glasses. And filming things that are just, sticks and bits of cardboard and things like that, all these very basic materials, but presenting them with this very high-tech kind of gear that makes a very sort of interesting combination. Let's keep the slide. And in all our works, it kind of is similar. Say with You're in My Dream, we've got this live streamed camera, which it's a very simple idea where the camera just goes on your face, but the technology that makes that work is really, really not very simple, and the processes behind it also are very complex and intricate to be able to deliver this very simple kind of idea. One thing that is a potential drawback for these types of artworks is that it's usually a one person at a time experience. So say for in our exhibition, Take Me With You, each piece is only viewable by one or two people at a time. And in that exhibition, it's actually kind of fine with the amount of viewers that attend, and now nobody's really going, of course, but with some of the other exhibitions we've been in, this has been a concern because, people want more people to watch something. In traditional film, you can screen something in the cinema to hundreds or thousands of people, and with VR, you've got one screen per person, and with our other works particularly as well. But at the same time, this can create a really special connection with the viewer, because the viewer is getting a really personal experience that is exclusive to the outside world or to other people and other audience members. So it's kind of really directly communicating, and hopefully making it feel like even the movie is just made for you. And and especially in the films where your face or your interactions are part of the story, you are actually getting an individual experience that nobody else has the same version of ever. So it is a plus side as well as a challenge.
So that kind of concludes the presentation part of our talk. I guess I would say that in summary, we use character-based narratives alongside immersive installations to create what we feel like a somewhat unique exploration of how to create emotional connections. So the technology lets us expand our cinematic world into the physical space of the viewer, or to bring the viewer directly into our animated space, which can also disarm the viewer and open you up to deeper emotional connections. Either that, or we're in it for the glory, because we had to put this ridiculous image in because we were lucky enough to show Passenger at the Venice International Film Festival in August last year, and got to do a photo shoot for Rolling Stone. And we've just photoshopped our Passenger character, our taxi driver, in there as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and it's wonderful to see some questions coming up. So please ask a few more questions, but we'll start answering those questions. It's quite strange answering questions by text. I hope you're all still listening in there. Can you see the questions, Isabel?
Yes. Okay. Let me ask you the question, number one then. How do you think about the character of the user viewer in VR? Do you approach characterization differently in VR to the other mediums you work in?
This is a good question, because the thing about VR is you're in the work, of course, like you are a character. So you definitely need to think about character differently, and we certainly did. And we had a big dilemma about whether to have a body for our character in Passenger or not. So we ended up deciding that we did want to do that, because we wanted to feel embodied and like you were in the work. You weren't just a fly in the wall. What would you say, Isabel? Like, I guess we also, that we did, for the first time in Passenger, we had a character that talks. None of our other works have ever used dialogue before, and we used that because I guess we wanted to make you feel comfortable, to really engage you more, and having a character talking directly to you in the VR felt like the right way to do that.
It was also partly because of setting our film in a taxi. It would be, having this character guide you through. It was a really, really important role for that character. The taxi was part of, the decision about that was to do with wanting to think about ways of delivering a story where you wouldn't have to walk around, or it wouldn't be obvious that you couldn't walk around in space, because we were creating just a 360 film. So we thought, if you're driving through a space, then you can have the story kind of drift past you or happen upon you without you having to go anywhere. And so then we thought about the taxi, and was also feeding into our themes of migrating to a new country, and all of these things informed how we came about that character. So I suppose it was really very integrated with the VR, that character.
Yeah, I guess, it's hard to answer, but just to quickly summarize, I don't know if it's totally different. Like, I think, there's, I guess, you kind of come up with a character in various ways, and I don't know if they're specific to the VR or to other mediums. I'm just going to go through these questions, without, I don't want to keep people here for too long. So I'll keep moving, but please chat or ask us another question via text. Ben's asking, where can you see Passenger? That is a great question. Yeah, obviously the show at Ringwood is closed, like everything is at the moment. I think we do hope to show it, to distribute it online at some stage on a VR platform, but we haven't done that yet. So for now, we are still showing it in film festivals and galleries. So for the moment, there's no way you can definitely see it. But yeah, if you keep an eye on our website, isabellandvan.com, there's a section about Passenger, and we'll keep you updated as to screenings there. Do you want to answer the next question, Isabel?
From Jack, asking about how we get our space. That's always quite tricky.
Yes, very hard.
One of the things that actually informed what Passenger became was that we became aware of a giant space that we could film in. So having that opportunity at that particular time meant that we were able to build this giant set, and so that before we found that space, we were looking at doing something a bit more digital. Or, yeah, it would have probably been quite a different film if we didn't come upon that space, but it was really felt quite random, and it isn't always easy. It's certainly that's something that we struggle with. And similarly at the Vic Market, we're lucky enough to get a space there to film that set as well, because our studio is actually quite small, so it's fine for shooting little things, but bigger productions we need to source spaces, but yeah, there's not really any.
And I guess I should add that Passenger was funded by Screen Australia, so we do usually get funding from somewhere to make work, and sometimes we pay for rent through that funding, and sometimes we're lucky and we can access that for free. Katie's asking about the onboarding and offboarding process. That's really, really important to us. And I guess we do it on a case-by-case basis. I think, I've heard lots of people talk amazingly about this, and probably in more detail than we do. But I guess, we do think about that. Do you have any specific strategies that you would share, Isabel, with onboarding and offboarding?
Well, with our non-VR works, like our other interactive works, we kind of create this, attractive looking booth or something that makes you want to approach it and want to find out what's inside. And that's kind of the first invitation, and we try and make a whole lot of visual cues, like with signs or with just, I guess it's almost like architectural or something, the way that we design the space so that it makes it hopefully fairly obvious what's required of you as technology-wise. But as far as the VR goes, we were so new to it, and making the film was a giant challenge that we're still kind of exploring ways to do that with Passenger. And in Take Me With You, we have the we've got this big installation of the sets that hopefully puts your mind in a space of being open to a new kind of world before you go into the VR. And then we've got the invigilators who help you with the technology side of it.
And we've definitely made mistakes, like with Passenger, the VR work. When we initially made it, we put 30 seconds of like a still at the start, because it just took a while for us. We were using phone headsets, and it would take a while for us to get the headsets on. And then when we showed that at Venice, the 30 seconds really confused people, because everyone's like, it's not working. There was music playing and sound, but that wasn't enough to kind of convince people that it was working. So it's also it depends on where it's shown and how it's shown. So in that case, we kind of failed that onboarding, but then, have then reworked it in different scenarios. Dion's asking about whether we've ever tried to incorporate smell. I never have. It's something I'm fascinated by, because smell is, so critical and really can create really intense emotional connections and memories. And we saw some works in Venice that were VR works where they did use smell, which were really interesting, but we haven't tried to do that.
I suppose that out in the open, showing at the market, there was
yes,
that environment, there was smell.
Yeah. Paula's asking about what do we do if viewers or audience experience emotion. And yeah, look, we do get lots of generally really positive feedback to our works, and then occasionally people do find it a bit confronting, or I think there are often strong reactions, which is a real positive. I mean, that's really wonderful. And I guess something that we've been aware of, or I've sort of certainly been aware of more lately, is if there's a way that people can express that emotion or do something with it. So with one of our early works called Play With Me, that was in a cubby house, and there was a little girl that you interacted with, a little animated character. And I showed it, we showed it a couple of times. And one of the later times we showed it, we let people write letters to Flora, the character. And we were inundated by these incredible, beautiful letters to the character. And that did get us thinking about, I guess, how to offboard and how to deal with emotions. And in Take Me With You, we did have, it wasn't really a visitor's book, but we did have a place that people could sit afterwards, and a place that people could, write comments about the work in if they chose to.
It's definitely something that's really great about showing work in a gallery that has invigilators as well. If often the invigilators that we're working with, that we speak to them quite a lot about the work and that kind of thing before the exhibition and during the exhibition, and hearing a lot of feedback of people who have experienced the works and have feedback, like having an invigilator there for those people to speak to is really important.
Lester's asking about whether we're thinking about the viewer experience and how the viewer will interact with the story as we're conceiving it. That's a really interesting question, because the viewer's definitely at the forefront always, but then in a way a story requires you to kind of go with an idea that you've got and run with it, I suppose. So I guess it's like two parallel things that run alongside. So I guess, it's a tricky one, because I think you're constantly pushing and pulling between those two things, I'd say. What do you think, Isabel?
Well, I'm just thinking about specific moments, I guess. Or say with It's a Jungle in here, we had all these, in lots of the interactive works, we've got all these pauses in the film, and thinking about making sure those pauses feel like a natural part of the story, and that while somebody's watching it, if the story stops here, are they going to know what to do, or are they going to have any response to this? So I think it does definitely, yes, we are considering it most of the time as we're creating the story, especially in the interactive pieces.
Sojang's asking about how it's video-based work are really difficult to apply to interactive technologies, and do we combine with 3D? Yeah, this was a thing we really considered when making Passenger, because initially we looked at trying to, we tried lots of different things, including like flat 2D paper cutout animation in a 3D computer-generated world, or we did look at working with a 3D animator at a certain point. And yeah, it is really, really tricky. And this actually feeds into Ben's question too about having people assist and managing other people. And I guess, like we very much really are, sorry, I'm having trouble articulating this, I suppose, but we do like to kind of be very hands-on and be making the work ourselves. And there's a point at which you kind of don't want to hand over or work with other people to the point where you've lost control and you're not able to do it yourself. So I suppose, we could work with 3D, which would be amazing, but I've got very limited 3D skills. So it's not something that I do. And I think, it's different for everybody. Other people work in different ways, but I think we work better if we can be hands-on actually producing the work. So we often end up doing more complex production techniques that are really challenging, just because, and we often expand our technical knowledge and work with new technologies. But very much try and do as much as we can ourselves with the help of, say, programmers and other people. Do you have a better way of articulating that, Isabel? I don't know if I
was thinking about
very clear.
question being video-based work being hard with interactive technologies. It takes a lot of just a lot of very strategic planning in how to have how to use different tropes of cinema, I guess, to kind of hide some of the clunky parts that might happen with doing interactive video. Of if you design something that's interactive and it has to have several different pathways, if you're making sure that the editing is seamless in that. I mean, it's going to be specific to each different project, so maybe not worth going into too much detail.
I think we've answered a lot of the questions. Hang on, I can see little red dots popping up here. Are there any other questions? Or let us know if we haven't answered any of your questions. Katie's popping in.
Popping back up.
Hi, Katie.
Hello. It's been a fantastic presentation. I've been so fascinated to hear about all of those works, and particularly the processes that you guys go through. Does anyone in the audience, we've still got people listening, so does anyone have any final questions for Isabel and Van? Otherwise, we might end the webinar. Speak now. I don't think so. So look, it's been absolutely great to have you here, and thank you for being so generous with your time and for doing this in such a kind of a sort of a strange format. It's hard to present when you're just kind of sitting on your own in your home talking to your computer. So but rest assured, it was absolutely fantastic, and everyone got a lot out of it. We've been recording this presentation, so it will be available online on the SensiLab forums page, and I'll just pop a link to that in the chat window here. And I'll also make sure that you guys all get an email sending you the directions to get there later on after we've finished. So that should be available in a few hours. But yes, thank you, Van. Thank you, Isabel, for sharing your knowledge and for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having us.
And everybody
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yes, and thank you for attending, everybody.